My dad told his coworkers I was the family burden at my own graduation party. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, pointed at me across the room, and laughed. My mom stood right next to him and didn't say a single word. I was 22 years old, holding my college diploma, and I stood there watching the whole room go quiet. That was 7 years ago. Last Tuesday, they knocked on my door. But before I tell you what they said and how I answered them, drop a comment right now and tell me, what time is it where you are, and what country are you watching from? I read every single one. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old. I run a small bookkeeping firm from my home office in Columbus, Ohio, and I have a rescue dog named Pepper, who hates strangers and loves cheese. My life is quiet, intentional, mine. It didn't start that way. Growing up, there were two kinds of children in my house. There was my brother Daniel, 3 years older, effortlessly charming, the kind of person who walked into a room and made adults compete for his attention. And then there was me. I was the one who set the table, washed the dishes, reminded my parents about teacher conferences they forgot to attend, and got a B+ on a math test. Only to be told Daniel got an A in that class when he was your age. I loved my brother. I want to be clear about that. Daniel wasn't cruel to me the way my parents were. He was just absent, not malicious, just completely absorbed in his own world, his own friends, his own future. He didn't notice what was happening to me because nobody asked him to notice. My parents weren't monsters in the obvious sense. They didn't scream. They didn't leave marks. What they did was quieter and, I think, more lasting. They treated Daniel like an investment and treated me like overhead. His college fund was funded and protected and talked about at dinner like it was sacred. Mine was mentioned once, when I was around 14, and then never again. When I was 16, I found out why. My mom had withdrawn the money from my education savings account, every dollar my grandmother had put in there over 10 years, and used it to cover Daniel's car insurance after he totaled his second vehicle in 18 months. When I asked about it, my dad looked at me with this expression I still remember, tired and slightly annoyed, and said, "He needed it more. You're resourceful. You'll figure something out." I figured something out. All right. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I wrote 47 essays my senior year of high school. I got into a state university with enough aid to cover tuition if I worked part-time. I didn't tell my parents any of this until the acceptance letter came. My mom's reaction was to ask if I could defer a year because she needed help around the house. I didn't defer. I left in August with 2 suitcases, a laptop I'd bought with babysitting money, and absolutely no emotional support from the people who were supposed to give it to me. College was the first time in my life I understood what it felt like to be treated like a full human being. My professors didn't compare me to anyone. My roommate didn't keep score. I studied accounting because numbers made sense to me in a way people sometimes didn't. Everything balanced. Everything had a place. There was always a clear answer if you did the work. I came home for holidays for the first 2 years. Each visit confirmed what I already suspected. Nothing had changed. Daniel had dropped out of the engineering program my parents had paid for, moved back into his old bedroom, and was working part-time at a sporting goods store while talking about getting into real estate. My parents treated this like a temporary detour for a person of his caliber. When I mentioned I'd been offered a paid internship at an accounting firm, my mom said, "That's nice, honey," and then turned back to ask Daniel if he'd eaten enough. The graduation party was my parents' idea. They insisted on throwing it, which surprised me because they'd shown so little interest in the actual degree. I should have known better. It wasn't about me. It was a Sunday afternoon in their backyard, about 30 people, mostly my dad's work friends and their families. I barely knew anyone there. I was standing near the drink table talking to my aunt when I heard my dad's voice carry across the yard, mid-laugh. He was telling a story to 3 of his coworkers. I heard the words Claire and burden in the same sentence, and I heard the laughter that followed, and I watched him point at me. Actually point like I was a punchline. He was delivering in real time. My aunt touched my arm. She'd heard it too. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with this expression that was somehow worse than the words themselves. Pity from someone who couldn't fix it. I set my cup down on the table. I went inside, got my purse, said goodbye to nobody, and drove back to my apartment 2 hours away. I did not cry until I was on the highway, and then I cried until I could barely see the road and had to pull over at a rest stop for 20 minutes. I didn't call them that night. I didn't call them the next week. I kept waiting to feel the pull. I was supposed to feel the guilt, the obligation, the voice that said they're still your parents. Go back, fix it, be the bigger person. That voice never came. What came instead was something quieter and steadier, more like a decision than a feeling. I was done. I sent one text, about 3 weeks after the party. It said, "I heard what you said at the party. I'm taking some time away. Please don't contact me." My dad responded, "You're being dramatic. Call your mother." I didn't. The first year was the hardest, not because I missed them exactly, but because I kept waiting for the call that never came, the one where they said they understood, where they apologized, where they acknowledged what they'd done. It didn't come at Thanksgiving. It didn't come at Christmas. It didn't come on my birthday. What came instead, about 8 months after the party, was a voicemail from Daniel. I almost didn't listen to it. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, thinking about how many times I'd watched him accept my parents' favoritism without comment, how many times he'd been in the room when something was said to me, and just let it happen. I pressed play anyway. His voice was different from what I remembered. Quieter. Less sure of itself. He said he'd been thinking about things. He said he'd been talking to a therapist. He said, and I had to rewind this part. He said, "I think I knew what they were doing to you for a long time, and I told myself it wasn't my business, and that was wrong. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm genuinely sorry." I sat down on my kitchen floor and stayed there for a while. Daniel and I started talking again slowly. Phone calls, then visits. He'd moved out of my parents' house, finally, into a small apartment across town. He'd left the sporting goods job and was doing something in logistics that he actually seemed to like. He was different. Not a different person, but a more honest version of the one I'd grown up beside. We talked about our childhood in a way we never had, when we were actually living it. He told me things I hadn't known, that my parents had fought constantly about money, that my dad had been passed over for promotions for years and taken it out on whoever was closest, that my mom had her own complicated story, with her own mother that she'd never dealt with. None of it excused anything, but it filled in the picture. Daniel told me something else too. He told me that our parents' finances had been deteriorating for a couple of years. My dad had taken out a second mortgage on the house during the pandemic, without telling anyone, betting on a home renovation business that didn't survive past its first year. The payments were becoming unmanageable. He'd been borrowing against his retirement account. He owed money to 2 people Daniel knew personally. I filed this information in the back of my mind and went on with my life. By then, I had built something real. My bookkeeping firm had 12 steady clients. I'd paid off my student loans. I'd bought a condo. I had a therapist I trusted, a handful of close friends, a routine that made me feel stable in a way my childhood never had. I was on a video call with a client on a Tuesday afternoon when I heard someone knock on my front door. Pepper started barking immediately. She takes her watchdog duties seriously despite being 11 pounds. I told my client I'd be right back and went to look through the peephole. My parents were standing on my doorstep. My dad was in a jacket I didn't recognize, newer than anything he used to wear. My mom had her hands clasped in front of her like she was waiting outside a church. They looked older, they looked tired. And they had no idea I was watching them through a circle of glass, deciding whether to open the door at all. I went back to my client, wrapped up the call professionally, sat in my desk chair for 4 minutes, and then went to the door. I opened it, but didn't step back to let them in. My mom spoke first. She said my name the way she used to when I was small, before everything got complicated, and something in my chest did something it didn't have permission to do. I kept my face still. "We need to talk," she said. "Please, Claire, can we come in?" "You can talk from there," I said. My dad shifted his weight. He wasn't used to not being let in. "This is a private matter," he said. "We'd rather not." "Then we can schedule a phone call," I said. What do you need? My mom looked at my dad. My dad looked at the ground, then back at me. And then the whole story came out in pieces. My mom talking faster than she normally did. My dad filling in numbers and dates like he was presenting a case. The second mortgage. The missed payments. The bank's timeline for foreclosure. They needed someone to co-sign a refinancing loan. They'd tried 2 other options. They needed someone with a clean credit history and verifiable income. They were asking me. I let them finish. I didn't interrupt. When my mom stopped talking, there was a long silence where I think they expected me to start asking clarifying questions, to step aside, to put a kettle on. I need a few days, I said. My dad looked relieved. My mom reached forward and touched my arm briefly. They left. I closed the door and stood in my hallway with Pepper sitting on my feet, which is what she does when she senses something is happening. I wasn't angry, exactly. I wasn't surprised. I was something more like clear-headed, the way you feel after a long, complicated math problem finally resolves into a clean number. I called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. When I told him what had happened, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "They came to me last week." I sat down. He said they'd shown up at his apartment, asked him to co-sign the same loan, and he'd told them he needed time to think. He hadn't called me because he wanted to think it through first. But now that we were both in it, he thought we should figure out our answer together. We talked for almost 2 hours. We talked about what co-signing would mean practically, that if our parents defaulted, it was our credit, our financial history, our problem. We talked about what it meant for us to be put in this position at all, that after 7 years of silence, after one graduation party punchline, after a childhood of being treated like second priorities, the first contact was a request, not an apology. A transaction. Daniel said something I've been thinking about ever since. He said, "They didn't come back because they missed us. They came back because they ran out of other options. And if we say yes, they'll know that's what it takes to get us to the table. And that's what every conversation for the rest of our lives will look like." I already knew what my answer was. Hearing Daniel say it out loud just confirmed it. We agreed to call them together, on speaker, the following evening. I dialed my dad's number, and Daniel was already on the line when he picked up. My dad seemed caught off guard by Daniel being there. He recovered quickly, started in with the financial details again, trying to establish the urgency. I let him finish. Then I said, "We've talked it over. The answer is no." Silence. My mom's voice came on. She said she didn't understand. She said family was supposed to show up for each other. She said, "And I want to be careful about how I tell this part because it matters," she said, "after everything we did for you." I felt Daniel take a breath on the other end of the line. I said, "I heard you at my graduation party, standing in your backyard, in front of your coworkers. You pointed at me and called me a burden." Dad laughed. "You didn't say a word. And I've been waiting 7 years for an acknowledgement of that. Not even an apology, just an acknowledgement. This is the first time you've contacted me since then, and it's to ask me to put my name on your mortgage. So I need you to understand that the answer isn't about the money." Another silence. Longer. My dad's voice came back, quieter than before. He said, "We're going to lose the house." "I know," I said. "And you're okay with that?" I thought about that question for a moment. Not okay. Not glad. Just unwilling to be the solution to a problem I didn't cause. For people who hadn't taken 10 minutes in 7 years to ask how I was doing. "I'm not okay with it," I said. "I'm also not able to fix it. I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." We ended the call. Daniel texted me 10 minutes later. "You okay?" I texted back. "Yeah. You?" He sent back. "Strangely, yes. I didn't sleep well that night. I want to be honest about that. There's no version of this where I felt great hanging up on my parents while they were about to lose their home. I'm not interested in pretending the clean, satisfying version of this story where justice feels like victory and everything resolves neatly. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a very sad thing that happened at the end of a long series of other sad things. But here's what I know. I spent 22 years trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided where I stood. I watched my grandmother's investment in my future get spent on my brother's car insurance. I stood in a backyard holding a diploma. I'd worked 3 jobs to earn and heard my father laugh while he called me a burden. And when I finally left, finally built something quiet and stable and genuinely mine, the only thing that brought them back was a number on a piece of paper. I know what kind of co-signer I would have become. Not a one-time signature, but a permanent solution. The resourceful one. The one who could figure it out. The burden who turned out to be useful after all. I blocked both of their numbers 2 days after the call. Not in anger, I was past anger, but because I knew that if I left the line open, the next call would come, and the one after that, and each one would cost me something I'd spent years rebuilding. Daniel and I still talk every week. He's doing well. He has a girlfriend I've met twice, and genuinely. He went back to therapy after everything happened, and told me it's been helpful. We don't talk about our parents much. There isn't a lot left to say. What I want to tell you, and I mean this, not as a tidy lesson, but as something I actually believe, is that the hardest part wasn't saying no. The hardest part was accepting that saying no was the most honest thing I could do. Honest for me, honest about what the relationship actually was, honest about what it would have cost me to pretend otherwise. My grandmother, who set up that education account, who saved money every birthday and Christmas for a decade so I would have options, used to tell me, "You can love someone and still refuse to be destroyed by them." She died when I was 19, before any of this happened. Before I had any idea how much I would need that sentence. I have her old recipe box on my kitchen counter, a photo of her on my refrigerator, a savings account I started in her name that I contribute to every month, for no purpose yet, just because it feels right to keep something of hers alive and growing. Pepper is asleep on the couch next to me right now. My condo is quiet. My books are balanced. My credit is clean. I'm 29 years old, and everything I have I built myself with scholarships I wrote essays for, with clients I earned, with boundaries I held at a cost I don't pretend was small. That's not a burden. That's a life. If any part of this story sounds familiar to you, I want you to know that you're not dramatic for taking it seriously. You're not selfish for protecting what you've built. And you are not, in any version of any story, a mistake. Hit like if this reached you. Subscribe to Revenge Fire for a new story every week. And keep those comments coming. I want to know where in the world you're watching this from, and what time it is wherever you are right now. I'll see you in the next one. There's something nobody tells you about walking away from people who were supposed to love you. It doesn't feel like freedom right away. It feels like standing in a very quiet room after years of noise, wondering if the silence means something is wrong with you. I spent a long time wondering that. I replayed the graduation party more times than I can count. I second-guessed myself. I asked whether I'd overreacted, whether I was being too rigid, whether the right thing was to go back and try again. That's what happens when you're raised to believe your feelings are the problem. You internalize the doubt so completely that even after you leave, you carry it with you like luggage you forgot to unpack. What I've come to understand, not from any single moment, but from years of quiet, steady living, is that the way people treat you is not an accident. It is a choice they make, over and over, in small ways and large ones. My parents chose, at every fork in the road, to invest in one child and extract from another. They chose to laugh at a joke made at my expense. They chose 7 years of silence over one honest conversation. And when they finally came back, they chose to lead with a request instead of an apology. Those weren't lapses. Those were patterns. And patterns tell you everything you need to know about what a relationship actually is versus what you wish it were. There's a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with grades or degrees. It's the intelligence of recognizing, finally, what is real. I had to develop that slowly, the way you develop anything worth having through repetition, through failure, through sitting with discomfort long enough that it stops controlling you. My grandmother gave me the first piece of it when she told me you can love someone and still refuse to be destroyed by them. Therapy gave me the second piece. Daniel, unexpectedly, gave me the third proof that it's possible for someone to look honestly at their own behavior and decide to become different. What my parents never understood is that the resourceful one they dismissed was building something they couldn't reach. Not out of spite. Spite would have required me to keep thinking about them, and I had better things to do. But every scholarship essay I wrote, every client I earned, every boundary I held at a cost that wasn't small, that was character being formed under pressure, the way anything durable is formed. They thought they were describing my limitations. They were actually describing my foundation. The hardest thing I've ever done wasn't saying no to their request. It was accepting that saying no was an act of honesty about what I could give, about what the relationship had always been, about what I owed myself after years of being told I owed them everything. That kind of honesty takes more courage than almost anything I can name. It asks you to see clearly when every instinct is telling you to look away. I'm not bitter. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. Bitterness would mean they still had a claim on my attention, and they don't. But I feel is something more like clarity, and underneath that, something that took me years to let myself feel without guilt. Gratitude. Gratitude for the difficulty, because the difficulty made me precise. Gratitude for the distance, because the distance gave me room to become someone I actually recognize. If you're sitting somewhere right now carrying a version of this story, a parent's voice in your head telling you what you aren't, a pattern you've been trying to explain away, I want you to hear this. The people who call you a burden are often the people most dependent on your willingness to carry them. You are allowed to set that down. You are allowed to build something quiet and stable and genuinely yours. And you are allowed to let that be enough.